at least on one level, that there's danger in the water. And yes, there's also beauty in water. There's nothing like a sunny beach or a mountain lake or a cascading river down a mountainside, which is pleasant and renewing and wonderful and life-giving. But if we're honest, we know that water also elicits a great deal of fear and respect from us as well. We build fences around our swimming pools. We put life jackets inside boats. We insist that our children have swimming lessons. You know from the news this week that even swimming in the ocean has its own perils, as 2 children were attacked by a shark along the East Coast. There's dangers in the water. More than likely, yes, I do, you probably know someone who's been a victim of drowning. We understand the fear that the disciples would have had today as they faced this windstorm and the waves as they came into the boat. It's a familiar story in the gospel. We get it regularly. It's not just found in Mark's gospel, but other boat stories like it are found throughout the gospels. And fear is the key element of emotion, at least in the passage. The disciples are afraid because of the storm, because of capsizing, because of the possibility of drowning. We know the story backwards and forwards, so much so that we hardly even pay attention to the fact that there are details in it that slide by us. You've heard me preach this story none less than 7 times since coming to be your pastor. This story repeats itself. And you know the power of spiritualizing the dangers that are in the water. How we can take storms and talk about them from every kind of angle, talk about them as illness and divorce and disillusionment and death. We can talk to them about personal storms. We can talk about them in terms of storms that the church itself is enduring. And we hear, of course, oftentimes preached, I've done it at least once or twice, to hear the rebuke of Jesus to those first disciples as if it's a rebuke to us as well. Have you still no faith? And if the truth be told, we know that we don't have enough faith. And so when we receive the rebuke as if Jesus is giving it to us, we go home knowing that indeed we don't have enough faith to face everything that can overwhelm us. And we see fear in our culture as something that should be resolved or medicated or somehow solved, don't we? Fears of all sorts of things. We can be hypnotized or receive treatment for all manner of fears. It could be fears of flying or closed spaces or elevators or heights or crowds or clowns or even water. So we make ourselves feel badly when we hear, "Oh, ye of little faith, why don't you have more faith?" And we know that when we leave on Sunday morning, we're with those disciples that come the storms of our life. We don't have enough faith oftentimes. It's been preached to you, because I've preached it, that when Jesus is in the boat, difficult times don't necessarily touch us, but they do touch us, don't they? Storms come and they overwhelm us. Tragedy strikes. Lives are overwhelmed. Death comes. Many congregations this Sunday morning are going to hear a simple message that you just have to have enough faith, because that's kind of what Jesus says to the disciples. Many will go home knowing that their faith's not enough. And this simple read kind of misses, I think, the significance of the exact place from which the fear actually comes. So look with me at your passage. As I looked at the passage a little closer this year, I realized that the terror is supposed to be there in the story. It's not supposed to be solved. It's not supposed to be medicated out of it. As I read it this year, I've come to believe that the have enough faith kind of approach is actually meaning that we're afraid of the wrong thing in this passage. The storm blows up on the sea. Many of these guys are fishermen. We don't hear anything about their terror until late in the story, when after they wake Jesus up and he calms the storm. Notice the last line. What's the real danger? What causes them to be afraid? The real danger is Jesus. Look at what happens in the text. He travels out on the sea. A storm blows up. He wakes up. He takes care of the storm. And only then are they terrified. They're not half as afraid of the storm and in awe as the storm as they are when Jesus is capable of calming that storm. His power is what they're afraid of. The real danger in the water isn't the water, it's Jesus. Look at their question. Who is this? Who is this who can calm even the wind and the sea. They sense something about his power that's dangerous. Now, you need to know in Mark's gospel, if you read a little bit around this, there's a Bible in your passage. You could tune out and just read your Bible. It'd be okay. You'd get something out of it. It'd be really powerful and profound. He's going from side to side of Sea of Galilee. He's going from one side, the Gentile side, to the Jewish side. He's always going outside the box. And when he goes outside the box, he meets demonic possessed people. And he uses the same term in this calming of the sea that he just used to rebuke the demons inside the legion. Who is this who can calm the sea? Who is this who can restore the right mind to a legion-possessed man? Who is this who has such power? You can hear in their voices the understanding that the thing to really be afraid of is not the storm, but the one who's in the boat with you, who can undo the storm. And so what kind of undoing can he do in our lives? And that's what the disciples really seem to be afraid of today. Who is this man that even the wind and the sea obey him? Mark Twain, famous quote, of course, I think I've used it a dozen times, said, people complain about the Bible because they don't understand it. He said, I complain about the Bible not because of the things I don't understand about the Bible, but because of the passages that I do understand. In this passage, we have a God of holy awe, who isn't our cosmic bellhop, who isn't running around trying to fulfill all of our fantasies and our narcissistic desires. This is a God who controls the wind and the waves. Immortal, invisible, God only wise, we sing in some of the exalted hymns. It's that kind of power, after all, that can turn a storm inside out. And so the question becomes, can it turn you and me inside out? Who wants to be turned inside out? That's the kind of power that makes people tremble down to their toes. I'll always remember the day that I was ordained. I was in Pemberville, Ohio, center of the universe, Bethlehem Lutheran Church, where I'd grown up, the old stone church, the house of the big God. Not like this big, exalted Gothic arching ceilings. So you get the idea of the kind of God that I grew up with. It was this massive undertaking. And so I was before the altar, before the bishop, about to kneel to receive my stole of ordination and laying on of hands. And I had only one thought. It was an irrational thought. Just don't strike me down right here in front of my mother. Apparently, I didn't care about my dad. I mean, he would have known why. That's probably what he would have got it. It was an irrational prayer. I didn't really know what I was saying, but I understood that I was before a power that was greater than me and was greater than my unworthiness to be standing where I was standing and about to do what I was going to do. And in that moment, somehow ill-expressed, I knew that God was going to demand my life, and God was going to turn my life inside out. He may not kill me, but he would change me. He would embarrass me. He would inconvenience the daylights out of me. He would cut off choices that I wanted, and he would open up choices I did not want. Paradoxically, God didn't kill me. He gave me a life that I could have never imagined, because I didn't even know you folks, and I've spent a life among you. I sensed God's call to come to the other side, to the uncharted waters to be with him, church. Who is this who has power over the wind and the waves? That's an important question for us to ask about the transcendent nature of God. It causes us sometimes to step back from the power of God. The ancient Hebrews knew that. They had the Ark of the Covenant. You remember the Ark of the Covenant? If you did rudimentary Sunday school or confirmation, they marched around out in the wilderness with it. They took it into battle everywhere it led them because it was God's footstool. And then they wised up and they realized this thing's dangerous. We need to put it away. And so they put it inside the Holy of Holies, inside the temple. And one time a year, a priest would go in to the Holy of Holies and burn incense on the altar before the Ark of the Covenant. And eventually, near the time of Jesus, they would tie a rope to that priest so that in case he couldn't make his own way out because something got him or whatever, they could pull him out. The holy, terrifying presence of God. Who is this who commands even the wind and the waves? Who is this who can set the minds right? Who is this who can raise the dead? Who is this? That's the question that struck terror into the hearts of the disciples. Now, you and I, we like to domesticate God, and we make Jesus our buddy, and that's not altogether untrue, but there's something also true in our reading today, and that's the nature of a holy and transcendent God, who's not just about my whim and fancy, but about God's will in the world, and about God's need for a people to witness to God's desire for his world. Maybe they knew, standing there eyeball to eyeball with Jesus, the danger that was in the boat with them, and it wasn't the storm. This holy, mysterious one, this disturbing one, this demanding one, would have done all kinds of unlikely things in the midst of that storm, and so they wondered what unlikely thing that he would do to them. And because of those 12 in the boat, you and I are here today. Unlikely things were done to them because of this God. And then I watched this morning a bit of the service from Mother Emanuel, African Methodist Episcopal Church. I don't know if you saw it. And thought about the events of this week, and thought about how this passage calls us to be witnesses of a holy, righteous, terrible God, and to be marked by his presence in our lives. You know, we're a society in love with violence. It's embarrassing. We love violence. We have a theology around restorative violence, as if somehow taking someone's life can actually restore violence. I think it's wrong-headed. I think it's actually an evil. I think it's a part of the sin that we all passively participate in, the idea that we need to take a life to preserve lives. I'm not sure that that works as well as we think it does. And I'm certain on the world stage, it doesn't get us any friends. But today, we can't have an us and them, because the shooter in that church was a member of the ELCA congregation there. And the pastor that he killed was educated at an ELCA seminary. So there is no us and them today. It's only us. And the world's desire to rip and tear, and God's desire for restoration through grace and mercy. And if you tuned in at all, and you can still watch it online, you see Mother Emanuel offer forgiveness and mercy and grace, a witness to the presence of a holy and righteous God in the middle of a storm with them, who may not calm the storm around them, but is holding them secure. And they're not looking at the shooter, and they're not looking to point fingers. They're looking at Jesus. And that's where we always need to look. Maybe we should take a cue from the architecture of the church. This part of the sanctuary, no, this old school Lutherans will only know this. You newbies, it's gonna be a lesson here. Where am I standing? What part of the church is this? Right here? I gotta stay at the microphone. Chancel, thank you, 8:30 arrivers. The chancel of the church. Outside the door is called the narthex. It's where we gather. Nobody knows that anymore. We call it a hallway. And where you peeps are all sitting is called the what? It's the nave, from which we get a term that you might be familiar with, Chad, Commander. Navy. Yar. In other words, you're in the boat. You're in the boat with Jesus. And he's looking for witnesses to an alternative to the way the world exercises its power and its dominion by force and violence. It needs fathers for fatherless people, and mothers for those who are motherless. It needs people to love them when they're unlovable, not to punish them, but to change their lives, to turn them inside out by the mercy, grace, and power of the living God who's in the boat. And so the disciples' question and their trembling fear should fill the hearts of Mother Emanuel and New Hope today when we pause to think about who's in the boat with us And we say, who is this who can calm even the wind and the sea? Amen.